Before streaming, before colour TV, even before remote controls, there was the BBC, one channel, a few hours a day. In the 1950s, Britain television was a luxury. Only around 350,000 homes had one. Tiny black and white sets, treated like crown jewels. For big events, like the Queen's 1953 coronation, whole streets crammed into one living room to watch history flicker by. So, what was British TV truly like back then? Let's take a look. Watching TV in the 1950s. Britain wasn't the casual, half-distracted pastime it is today. It was an event. For starters, the screens were tiny, so small that many families bought special magnifying lenses to place in front of them, like giant fish bowls, to make the image appear larger. The picture was black and white, the sound hollow, and there was no such thing as a remote control. If you wanted to change the channel, well, there was only one channel, but you still had to get up to adjust the volume or picture. And forget pausing or rewinding. If you missed something, you'd simply missed it. That's why families made sure they were ready before the programme began, often dressed neatly as though they were going to the theatre. The BBC usually didn't start its programming until late afternoon. Mornings and early afternoons were reserved for the test card. That eerie picture of a little girl and her clown doll, accompanied by a high-pitched tone, just to prove your TV worked. When the show finally began, the family gathered in respectful silence. Curtains were pulled shut, chairs nudged forward, and TV, often tucked into a corner like something precious, flickered to life. Sometimes it was even covered with a cloth when not in use, like something that needed to be protected. There was no scrolling on phones, no chatting over the show. The TV was the star, and it demanded full attention. Watching TV in the 1950s wasn't just about what was on, it was about when it was on. The BBC ran a highly structured, almost ritualistic timetable, leaving families waiting and anticipating every broadcast. The day started slowly. Mornings and early afternoons were mostly test cards. Occasionally, short education films or early children's programmes would appear around 3:30 p.m. But these were rare and brief. By late afternoon, the real excitement began. Children's shows like Muffin the Mule appeared around 5 p.m, offering a brief burst of puppets and jingles before the adults took over the room. Then came the evening news at 7 p.m, delivered in the unmistakably proper BBC voice, followed by a light drama, variety show, or a live black and white play around 8 p.m, the main event for families. And, in a uniquely British touch, there was the toddler's truce, a now-forgotten policy that required all programming to pause between 6 and 7 p.m, so parents could put young children to bed. When do you think the BBC scrapped that rule? Drop your guess in the comments below. I'll reveal the answer at the end of the video. Finally, by around 10:30 p.m, the broadcast ended. No late-night reruns, no on-demand viewing, just the national anthem, the screen fading to black, and silence until the next broadcast. So, what filled those limited hours of programming? Let's look at some of the most iconic shows that defined the decade. For children, Muffin the Mule was a household name. He was a clunky little puppet who danced on a piano, delighting young audiences and becoming the BBC's first true children's TV star. You weren't a real kid if you didn't know Muffin. Then came The Grove Family in 1954, Britain's first ever soap opera. It followed a working-class family in London and had everything: drama, heart, and the beginning of a genre that would eventually bring us EastEnders. Before modern news anchors took over, there was television newsreel, a visual bulletin made up of narrated footage, bringing current events to life. It felt more like cinema than journalism. Quiz and game shows were also gaining popularity. What's My Line? Featured celebrity guests trying to guess people's jobs. Imagine a more polite, black and white version of today's panel shows. And for the brainy crowd, Animal, Vegetable, Mineral. A quiz show where professors and museum curators tried to identify historical objects on the spot. Basically, University Challenge's great-granddad. Other fan favourites? The Flower Pot Men for kids, and Dixon of Doc Green, the nation's favourite friendly bobby, who always ended episodes with a quiet little evening all. These shows were events. No replays, no catch-up. You saw it live, or you missed out. Visually, 1950s. British TV looked more like theatre than television. Sets were simple, often no more than a chair, a curtain, and a microphone. Most shows were broadcast live, straight from cramped studios. What happened on set happened on screen, mistakes and all. Actors were mostly stage performers, so their acting style was big and theatrical, full of dramatic gestures and clear, precise speech. Sometimes it felt like you were watching a play more than a television show. The pace was slower than today's TV. Scenes had long pauses and sometimes awkward silences, a result of missed cues or live technical glitches. There were no CGI effects, no retakes, no fancy post-production. If something went wrong, the audience witnessed it live. But viewers didn't mind. These little imperfections made the broadcast feel genuine and alive. Even the camera work was simple. Few angles, minimal movement, and mostly static shots that focused on the performers. Everything was in black and white, of course, so contrasts were important to give depth and shape on the screen. Despite the humble production values, or maybe because of them, watching TV back then was a special experience. Back then, TV didn't just entertain, it connected people, made history, and felt like magic. By the end of the 1950s, television was no longer a novelty, it was a national habit. In less than a decade, the number of homes with a TV had exploded from just 350,000 to over 10 million. This new glowing box in the corner quietly reshaped British life. Evenings that were once spent at the pub or catching up at church now revolved around the glowing screen in the living room. For the first time, people across the country were watching the same programmes, hearing the same news, and sharing the same cultural references. It created a kind of unity, a shared national living room. Interestingly, at this point, there were no commercials yet. The BBC programming was uninterrupted, ad-free, and funded by the public. Advertising wouldn't arrive until ITV launched in 1955, bringing a new era of sponsored programming and competition. It wasn't just technology, it was a cultural force. TV brought the outside world into the home, and by doing so, it quietly changed the home itself. As TV became part of everyday life, some programs and events rose above the schedule, leaving their mark on the culture itself. Perhaps the biggest of them all was the 1953 coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. Over 20 million people tuned in to see history unfold in flickering black and white. Streets emptied, living rooms filled, and families huddled around tiny screens, experiencing an event that transcended the screen. It was a turning point for British television and a huge driver of TV sales. The mid-50s also saw the launch of ITV in 1955, Britain's first commercial channel. Suddenly, there was competition, adverts, and a new focus on programming aimed at working-class audiences. This shook up the TV landscape and introduced a model that would dominate the decades to come. Meanwhile, the BBC was experimenting with formats that hinted at what the 1960s would bring. Armchair theatre brought gripping dramas into homes, and shows like Sunday Night at the London Palladium combined variety, music, and star power, creating must-watch national events. By the end of the decade, television had grown from a novelty to a national obsession, shaping not just how Britain watched, but how it saw itself. And that's a glimpse into British TV in the 1950s. A new and magical window into the world that brought families and whole streets together. Unlike today's endless stream of content, every broadcast felt like an event, and people remembered them for life. And to answer the question from before, when did BBC scrap the toddler's truce? If you guessed 1957, you were right. ITV complained that the hour-long blackout was costing them money and viewers. The government agreed, and just like that, bedtime lost its sacred hour. If you enjoyed this trip back to 1950s Britain, give the video a like, hit subscribe, and let us know in the comments. Which 1950s TV moment would you love to witness live? Until next time, evening all.